Good morning, everyone. Great to be here in Kelowna. First time in Kelowna. Only second time in BC for me, so it's a real pleasure to be here. I've known Gordon for many years. We've talked by phone many times, but last night was the first time we'd shaken hands, so it's great to see you in person, Gordon. I have been involved, as Grace indicated, with rural and regional development issues for a long time. I'm a product of rural America. I grew up on a farm in Indiana. My family still owns the farm. And it was very young in age that I learned one of the crowning lessons of life, and that is never give up, perseverance. My father was a good German farmer who believed in weed-free fields, and the problem I had was that I grew up before Roundup. And in my part of Indiana, all of the fields were a half-mile long, so my parents would put the water at the other end of the field, and it was a marvelous incentive. And it was somewhere along that half mile that I probably had my first thought that there must be inside work somewhere. I've spent my career mainly in the marketplace of ideas, but now I'm in the marketplace of commerce and capital. And I chair a company called Market Square, and we are taking to market a product called Smart Food Chain. And Smart Food Chain is all about creating a digital farmers market that connects buyers and sellers of healthy, trait-rich foods. But it also discovers price for those products, because right now we really don't know what the price of a gold heirloom tomato with Sicilian seed stock, no herbicides, no pesticides, and only fertilized with sheep manure. We don't know what the price of that tomato is. And this kind of appeals both to my economist DNA, but also to my sense that we really need a better food chain to give consumers a richer choice of nutritious foods. And then the second thing we're doing is we're authenticating that product from the farm all the way to your kitchen using the Internet of Things and blockchain technology, believe it or not. And the third thing we're doing is we're keeping track of all of those transactions and all of that supply chain information in a product we call NutriCloud that will allow farmers to make smart grow decisions and you as consumers to make smart, personalized nutrition decisions. So that's what I'm doing now, and I'm having the time of my life. But I did grow up in Indiana. And as you may or may not remember, that is the home of David Letterman. You all remember David Letterman, okay, The Late Show? And Milan Wall knows where the head office for the Late Show was. Where is it? Wahoo, Nebraska, absolutely right. So thanks to my Indiana connections and my still phone line to Wahoo, Nebraska, I hold in my right hand tonight's top 10 list. So, tonight's top 10 list is top 10 ways to grow your rural region. Top 10 ways to grow your rural region. This never quite made it past the editors in Wahoo. I don't understand that, Milan, because it's something they should have really cared about. But this is the one that would have been on The Late Show. So this is sort of my way of summarizing everything I learned about how rural regions can grow. So I'm going to give you 10 things that sort of distill everything I learned in the course of my career, how rural regions can grow. So here we are, drum roll please, number 10. Give up on buffalo. Quit while you're ahead. The buffalo hunted factory is a vanishing species. New factories, new mills have been hunted across the fruited plain for more than 70 years. and there have been some notable trophies put on walls. Mercedes-Benz in Alabama is sometimes cited as one of these. BMW in South Carolina is another. But for the vast majority of rural regions, this hunt is hugely difficult and expensive today. There are fewer buffalo to hunt, the factories are bigger, they're fewer in number, and hence, if you want to go hunting buffalo, you need a really big buffalo gun. Really big. Really, really, really big. The other thing we've learned, and perhaps this lesson's been learned more in rural America than in rural Canada, but that may not be the case. The other thing we've learned is that these factories are unbelievably footloose. And the people who own these factories love free food. They love free food. And they now roam the world. These buffalo now roam the world in search of lower labor cost, cheaper land, and tax forgiveness. And the question I would pose to you, is that a race you really want to win? Cheaper labor, cheaper land, and lower taxes. Is that a race you really want to win? And the other dilemma that rural regions often face, and I realize this is going to change across the state and province where you sit, but in many states in the United States, the business climate that surrounds you as a rural region is often getting very difficult. I'll give you an example from the United States. Illinois. Illinois has the single largest underwater public pension fund in America. They are raising taxes like no tomorrow. In Chicago, if you are a retired teacher in Chicago, you will retire with a six-figure pension, to give you an example. So if you are a downstate Illinois rural county and you're trying to hunt buffalo, you got a really bad problem because the State House is creating a tax climate that is almost impossible to get around. That's going to vary province by province, state by state, but my point is this is a very tough hunt to mount in the best of circumstances, and it has gotten so much more difficult. So number 10, give up on buffalo. And if your local economic development officials are intent on this strategy, my advice to you is sit down with them and persuade them otherwise, because they will waste your resources. They will waste dollars trying to recruit, and in the end, you'll be poorer for it, in my opinion. Number 9, think regionally, act regionally. Be the catalyst for regional dialogue. Local municipalities, regional districts, in the case of the United States, counties, these are not economic entities. They're historical anomalies. They're interesting reminders of the past. They are not engines of the future. And this may be bitter medicine for some of you, but the Global Economic Olympics, as I like to call it, does not really care. The Global Economic Olympics does not really care where your forefathers drew governmental jurisdictional lines. It really does not care. What it does care about is how well and how fast you innovate to market. And when you innovate to market, critical mass matters. And therein lies the eternal dilemma for rural America and rural Canada: finding critical mass. In rural regions like the vast majority that you represent, critical mass means finding every partner you can find. For many parts of rural America, where I'm much more familiar, it probably means in most parts of rural America something like 30 counties, 20 to 30, in some cases maybe 40 counties. In the case of Kansas, I actually live in Missouri, but I can see Kansas. In Kansas, it probably means the western half of Kansas, because they're all in the same economic boat. And that really becomes the key as you think about forming your region. Forming regional collaboration is not a natural act. It is not a natural act. There are no powerful laws of attraction that make this happen. But you must find ways to make it happen. And I think for me, what I've learned, this means at least 3 things in practice. Number 1, you must either be King Arthur or Queen Guinevere. You or your organization must provide a round table that provides a safe, nurturing space for regional discussion. And you have to then leverage your leadership network to the max to bring people to that table. Secondly, if you decide that you or your organization is not or cannot be Queen Guinevere or King Arthur, then at least be a knight or lady of the round table and honor the round table that others provide. You're present, you may not steer the discussion, but at least you're there and you're participating. And the third thing you can do is to cease and desist. Cease and desist from cannibalizing development actions that represent a negative sum game. The beggar your neighbor approach to economic development that is etched in the DNA of many economic developers, it simply needs to stop. We've got to grow the pie, not fight over who gets the factory. Number 8 on my list, find your event in the Global Economic Olympics and insist that the leaders of your region, the private sector leaders, the public sector leaders, the NGOs of your region, insist that they figure out what it is that your region does best. Fund and lead this effort. We all know who this is, right? We all know who this guy is. No, not Mark Spitz. Michael Phelps. Now, when he looked in the mirror, it was pretty obvious what his event was. It was really obvious. God made him to be a swimmer. You know, there are very few people in the world that have the physique matched to swimming that Michael Phelps has. And the amazing thing is, it's not just the 100-meter freestyle. He's done it in 5 or 6 events. But he has the physique to do that. Every rural region, no matter where you are, whether you're in Kansas or BC, you start with a handful of distinct economic assets. It may be the perfect climate, the soils, and the Norwegian bachelor farmers to grow corn. That might be it. It may be mineral deposits. It may be forests. It may be a cluster of businesses that specialize in the glass skins of office buildings, a cluster I found in southern Minnesota, of all places. But no matter what it is, these assets form the crucial factors that guide your answer to a question that determines your future more than any other. In which global economic events will you compete? Sometimes your region's strengths will be obvious. In other cases, they may be hidden. But in every case, you must find them so that you focus only on those economic events in which you have a chance to meddle. Your region will fail if it tries to compete in every event. It will fail. Or if it tries to compete in events in which you have no competitive advantage. So how do you determine what those events are? Well, I think it has to be rooted in two things. Number one, you must go through an objective analysis of the data. And there are a lot of people doing this. There are a lot of ways to do this. There may not be one perfect way to do this, but this is a science that's pretty well known. The second thing, though, is perhaps less well known and less followed, and that is you have to pool the knowledge of the region. You have to have an on-the-ground assessment, dispassionate from the data, that looks at where's the innovation happening? Where are the things that we really do well that we haven't heard of? Are there dots that can get connected in ways that really create something big for our region? That happens with an on-the-ground kind of assessment. And this shared conversation needs to happen, and it probably needs to be facilitated by somebody outside the region so that no one agenda gets advanced. In nearly every region you represent, no one will step forward to lead this effort. That's my experience. Very few people say, let's do this. Most people sit back and wait for someone else to do it. And this creates a huge, painful vacuum in many instances. And when there is a vacuum, I suggest to you the buffalo hunters will fill it. Okay? So this is sort of tied to number 10. You got to get rid of the buffalo hunters, but in its place, you must create a process by which you are determined to figure out, like Michael Phelps, what it is you do best. Number 7, once you've figured out which event you're really going to compete in, you've got to craft a strategy for gold. Aim for the gold, but only with an outstanding long-term plan. No one ever wins a gold medal in the Olympics by starting out the day before the event. This is a years-long, a lifelong quest. And it's the same. It's the same when we think about economic development. This strategy, in my opinion, must do 3 things to be a successful strategy. Number 1, it must lift up your Olympic event and intentionally say no to everything else. As wonderful as your region may be, none of you will become the nation's center for oncological research. Let's admit that. That's going to happen in Toronto, probably, or maybe Vancouver. It's not going to happen in rural BC. Second, you need to focus on the unique needs of your chosen business cluster. Whatever the event is in which you think you have a shot at the gold, the businesses in that cluster really become crucial. And how we think about lifting up that cluster and making it successful, connecting the dots, filling in the gaps in that business cluster, that's really core. And the third thing I would suggest is to keep the public sector in a supportive role, not a lead role. If you're going to win in the Global Economic Olympics, with all due respect, it will likely not be because of Ottawa. It will likely not be because of Ottawa. It's going to happen because of you and your businesses and your people and your universities and the spirit of British Columbia. But they can support, but don't count on them to take the lead. Number 6, stoke innovation. I've been a public entrepreneur, and now I'm a private entrepreneur. And I'm absolutely convinced that innovation is really what drives progress. And rural regions have ingenious people. I've met them all of my life, sometimes in the Chatterbox Cafe, sometimes at Fed meetings, sometimes in meetings just like this. Innovation offers 2 paths to the future. One is making old things better. The other is making better things. Those are very different paths of innovation. Doing old things better and making better things. And in the case of rural America, you all will speak better to rural Canada, but in the case of rural America, the past century has mainly been about the first type of innovation, doing old things better. Best example, the U.S. corn crop. You know, a century ago, we were doing well to get maybe 60, 70 bushels per acre. And now we get, I think the U.S. average is over 180 now, okay? So that's a phenomenal change. But what did it mean for rural America? It meant going to massive farms and depopulating the countryside, and now the Norwegian bachelor farmers in Lake Wobegon are very few in number. So it's time, I think, for rural America to think about what happens in a digital age. Is it possible for rural America to do better things? And if so, what are some of those better things? Well, how do you do that? How do you think about stoking innovation in a rural region? Well, I'd offer 2 bits of advice. First, you need to find an organization that wants to disrupt your region. You want to find an organization that recognizes that the status quo is not enough. This might be a business organization. I've seen a few examples of these, a cluster of businesses that are trying to reinvent themselves. It might be an educational organization. It might be a confederation of local schools, a community college, possibly a regional university. The second thing that I think really needs to happen if we're to stoke more innovation is we must hold provincial governments accountable. Should it be the case that all innovation happens only in Vancouver? Should that be the case? Should we accept that digital technology is only going to happen in these highly expensive, massive concentrations of people and businesses with huge congestion? Is that what we are going to accept about our future? Or is it possible that we think about taking the power of digital innovation and bringing it to more and more of our people in ways that grows the pie? That is a proposition that I think needs to be tested and pushed and probed as we have conversations with provincial and federal governments. And related to this, number 5, become world-class economic gardeners and make your region the best place on the planet to start and grow a prosperous business. I think especially for rural regions, there is no substitute for businesses that are rooted in the region. This past half century of buffalo hunting has shown over and over again that businesses recruited to your region have a nasty habit of being footloose. They have this nasty habit. They play one region off several others, getting better and better and better offers in the process. And by the way, did you all watch the Amazon HQ2 sweepstakes last year? Did you all watch that? They're masters at this game. Absolute masters at this game. Kansas City, I shudder to think how many resources they put into this, but they joined the sweepstakes, and I give them credit for doing that. But at the end of the story, what was Amazon interested in? The very biggest of the big. New York wasn't even big enough. They walked out of New York. So this game never ends. This game never ends. And instead, how do you grow your own businesses and business leaders that have a stake in the region, that are wedded to the values and the spirit of the region? 3 things for you to ponder on this note. Number one, I think we have to focus, especially in rural regions, on how we improve business clusters. All of the economic analysis that's been done around the world suggests business clusters are really critical to driving economic growth in a region. The challenge for rural regions is that businesses can all too often be more of an island than a cluster. So how do we lift up these clusters, help connect the dots, recognize where there may be a missing element in the cluster? All of this is about soft infrastructure, and it's about the kinds of support that help firms connect along common interest. And here I think small investments in supporting business clusters pay big dividends long term. Number 2, and Gordon and I were talking about this over breakfast, building a better entrepreneurial support system in the region. If you are a rural entrepreneur, you're sort of Indiana Jones out there on your own. And we need to figure out how to provide a better ready toolkit and to provide all the supports that a rural entrepreneur needs in order to compete in this kind of business environment. And an important part of that is capital. In today's world, if you want to be a digital company, it will take upfront seed capital. And how we think about putting seed capital into digital firms in rural areas is a huge issue for us to ponder. Now, the interesting thing is, a lot of rural regions have a significant amount of wealth. The farmers of Nebraska have a lot of wealth, Milan. The question is how we recycle that wealth in creative ways through mechanisms that invest in promising IT digital age companies that fit within your chosen cluster and event that you're going to compete. That is the art form. That is the art form. And again, that is not going to come from Ottawa. It's not going to come from Vancouver. It's going to come from you, because no one else is going to do this. So creating this kind of economic gardening approach really becomes, I think, a cornerstone to how you think about the conference you're going to have 20 years from now when you look back at the progress you've made. This is absolutely cornerstone, in my opinion. Number 4, make a smart public ask. Go after a few public goods that unlock your region's potential and make one collective ask. We are now in a period of unprecedented fiscal austerity. I think we can say that statement for the United States, and I think we can say that statement for Canada. There is not enough money In Ottawa, there is not enough money in Washington to go around. So how are we going to divide public funds into investments in public goods? How are we going to decide which bridge gets built, which road gets built, which university gets funded, which regional economic development district gets their ask funded? I believe only one strategy makes sense in this environment: a limited but compelling ask. And there are two things that I think you can do. Number one, insist that your region bring focus to public investment. What is the one or two or three things that if the public sector invested, it would really unlock your region's potential? What is that one or two or three things? Not 10 or 20, and Lord knows not 50 or 75, but what are the one or two or three things? And then, once you've decided what that public good is that your region cannot live without, once you know what that is, then every mayor, every regional district, every school superintendent, every hospital administrator signs that petition and says, this is what we need. Now, why does that matter? Because in Washington, and I suspect in Ottawa, if one group shows up and says, we all agree this is the one thing we need, do you think you're going to get their attention? I think so. I think so. But this is a very, very rare art form. Almost no one does this. But I believe necessity will drive rural regions to do this. Because if you go to Ottawa, if you go to Vancouver and you say, here are the 36 things we need, their eyes are going to glaze over and they're going to say, thanks for coming. That's what's going to happen. Number three, only recruit firms that round out the regional team. There will be a role for some recruiting, but you want to recruit players to your team that fill in the critical missing link. And I put on this screen a picture. Does anybody know who this picture is? Probably nobody here knows who that is. Well, do you remember that in 2015, the Kansas City Royals won the World Series? Do you remember that? We remember that. We remember that after having 300 lost seasons since. That pitcher is named Johnny Cueto. And he had a right arm that could just fire missiles. He was only with us for one season, but they brought him in mid-season, end of July, as I remember. They brought him in mid-season because the manager of the Royals knew they had something special going on, but they had to have a right-handed reliever to get into the World Series. And Johnny Cueto won Game 2 of the World Series. He won it with that right arm. My point is, there is a role for recruiting, but you need to be laser-like in figuring out what is it we need to bring to the region that really makes the whole go wow. And instead, most recruiting efforts are like trolling. You just wait and see what hits the bait, right? Now, whether these businesses that you've decided are crucial to our business sector, our business cluster, whether those businesses come from Vancouver, whether they come from Alberta, whether they come from Ontario, whether they come from Tennessee, or whether they come from China, really doesn't matter. You're after them because of what they add to the mix. And here comes the value of knowing your strategy and being willing to spend for the right pitcher, because you know which event you're competing in and you gotta have the pitcher. When you do target a business, the question in America often becomes, how many farms will you give away to get the business? Perhaps in BC we say, how many forests will you give away to get the business? And too often the answer is too many. So even when you hire a Johnny Cueto, you gotta be willing to draw the line and say, we'll pay this much, but only so much. Number two, and we're getting to the top of our list, build a home for regional action. Acting regionally makes all the difference, in my opinion, especially in rural regions. But ultimately, you must build a house. You must build a house to own your strategy and to hold you accountable. I've spent the past 30 years studying how regions compete in the global economic Olympics, and one conclusion stands out above all others. Regional economic success is 1 part science, 1 part art. The science is the easy part, bringing experts to your region to slice and dice the data, figure out what you do best. The art is forging all of your great leaders into one congenial board of directors. There's no one right way, there's no one wrong way to do it, but do it you must. In all of these studies I've been involved with, at the Fed, at OECD, and beyond, the regions that truly succeed master the art form of regional governance, thinking, acting as a region. Without this kind of regional collaboration, local governments will default to the most vicious forms of development border wars. As you form what I call regional governance, you must do more than simply give birth to this regional action. You must give it a home. And that calls for wisdom, for vision, and for creativity. Will it, for example, be part of an existing regional institution, such as a university? Will it be a standalone entity? Who pays for the light bill? How big is the staff? None of these are simple questions, and they can only be answered by the collective voices from that region. But my counsel is very simple. If you do not first form this regional governance and then build a sturdy home to make sure it grows and thrives, then you will get the future you are already feeling. And the picture that you see in front of you, does anyone know what building this is? This is the home of Research Triangle. Research Triangle is one of the best examples of regional collaboration that has transformed a region in the United States. Research Triangle in North Carolina. This was a vision when North Carolina was an agricultural state, when they mainly grew tobacco. It was called Tobacco Road, and that's why they're called the Tar Heels. But there was a vision, and that vision resulted in the connecting of Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. And inside that triangle, they brought IBM. And from that beginning became one of the real tech centers of the world. They built a home. They built a home for that collaboration. It stands to this day, and it's a pretty interesting model to look back on and say, that works. And finally, getting to the very top of our list, Number one on our list, celebrate Lake Wobegon. That mythical place, that little town that the times forgot, that the decades could not improve, where all the women are strong and the men are good looking, and all of the children are above average. As Garrison Keillor has done so well, we must celebrate and lift up the uniqueness that makes rural Canada a great place to live. And this, at the end of the story, is probably your single greatest asset. There are people in this world desperate to find a great place to live. There are young millennials turning into parents who are desperate to find a great place to raise their children. And you must find those wonderfully distinct things that you simply cannot find anywhere else. For Garrison Keillor, it was the Chatterbox Cafe. It was the Sunday potluck with Pastor Inkvist with tuna hot dish. It was the Sons of Canute Memorial and all those Norwegian bachelor farmers. But whatever your fabulous differentiators are, they must be lifted up and celebrated. And the rest of the world needs to know. They're hidden gems. Your region will never compete with Vancouver or Calgary. But you don't want to, and you don't need to. But you must figure out a way to define the wonderful spirit and values and assets of living in this place that make it stellar. People will choose you because they want something different. Here are a couple of differences you might consider. Open space, green space. I think this is an idea that absolutely applies here in BC. And one of the things I love about rural Canada is all the open space. For 25 years now, I've been taking my sons to rural Canada to fish every year. And it has been a fabulous bonding experience with my sons. But how do we think about sharing the open green spaces in ways that are creative and attract other people? I think the British have an idea that is worth considering, and that's the country footpaths. It brings people out of the city into the open spaces of Britain. And they've turned this amazing network of hiking paths that literally traverses tens of thousands of private farms in a way that no one complains about. Rails to trails in the United States is another idea that does this. I think there are lots and lots of people looking for authentic experiences in rural places. How you unleash those is a very good question. And the second idea I would offer is one that's very close to my current life, and that's food, food, and food. Today's consumers increasingly want to savor authentic food. Slow food, you've heard this expression. Slow food is now a massive trend in Europe. I think it's coming to North America. People want to know where their food came from. One of my local wine stores has wine tastings where they bring in vintners from all over the world. And the last two that I've attended, one of them was from Austria, one of them was from the south of France, and both of them are using the same language, biodynamic wine. Biodynamic wine, they argue, tastes different because it captures micronutrients from the earth that get expressed in the glass when it's poured into the glass and when it meets your tongue. This is a way of looking at food that is already part of our consumer fabric, and it's going to grow. So how you think about connecting the dots of the wineries in Kelowna with unique food experiences in rural British Columbia, with the scenic bounty of rural British Columbia, there's a whole there that's bigger than the sum of the parts, is my point. Is that a BC food trail, a BC wine trail? Is it a BC slow food trail? I don't know what that formula is, but if I were in your shoes, that's one of the things that I would be thinking about. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is tonight's top 10 list, the one that David Letterman never got to give, but you heard it here live in Kelowna today. Thank you so much.